But if some Christians just invented the story that Jesus was born in Bethlehem and it never happened, then there should have been other Christians creating other stories about Jesus being born in cities somewhere else. But historians know that in all the accounts that have come down to us from the early Christians, they say there is only one place where Jesus was born, and that is the city of Bethlehem. And what about the archaeological evidence in Bethlehem? Does it support the Nativity story? Well, to answer these questions, we travel to different sites in the Holy Land with Dr. Stephen J. Fawn, the founder and president of the University of the Holy Land and Center for the Study of Early Christianity. Since 1992, he has significantly contributed to the publication of the Dead Sea Scrolls as a member of the international team of editors. Within Israel, his expertise was expanded through on-site archaeological training under the late professors Yigal Yadin and Yigal Shiloh.
In ancient villages, as in villages just before the modern time, they were made up of 2 or 3 major patriarchal families. And generally, with each one of the homes associated with a patriarch, there would be a guest room. And this guest room would be reserved for people coming in, friends of the family, people from outside. And it would be the good pleasure of the patriarch or leader of the family to be able to be the host to these guests. And in the case of Jesus and his birth, we find that Mary and Joseph end up coming and finding that there's no room in the inn according to Roman standards if you had a Roman city, but in a village, what you have are guest rooms and patriarchal homes.
When Joseph and Mary arrived in Bethlehem, most likely Joseph went straight to his paternal home and stayed in the guest room. Jewish custom would have demanded that he receive protection and help for himself, and especially his wife Mary, who was pregnant. Some time passed while they were staying with his family, and then it came time for Mary to be delivered. But Bethlehem, like Joseph's family guest room, would have been filled with families and relatives returning for the census. In Joseph's father's house, there would have been no private place for Mary to have her baby because the guest room was filled with relatives. There would be no private place until someone had the bright and compassionate idea to suggest she could have the baby down below, away from the crowded kataluma, the guest room, in the warmth of the storeroom and animal cellar. There, she could have privacy, but still be within the security of the family home. So Jesus was safely born in the city of David, as the angels told the shepherds in Luke 2:11, and laid in a manger or feeding trough for the animals. That a child should be found lying in a manger was unique, and yet it may have reflected not a situation of abandonment and isolation, but one of compassion and protection, and of the order of family life in traditional Jewish society of the first century. It is also interesting to note that the traditional site of Jesus' birth in Bethlehem is in the middle of the city, where the family homes would have stood in antiquity and not in the surrounding countryside.
We sometimes read Luke and we picture Joseph and Mary traveling in the rain on a cold December night, and Mary is in labor and pain, about to deliver this baby, and Joseph frantically walks from door to door, knocking on the Motel 6s of Bethlehem, which there weren't any, of course, trying to find accommodations. But actually, if we really read what Luke has to say, he says they went to Bethlehem, which was Joseph's ancestral home. That means they had extended family there. They were going to a place where they were known and loved and where they would receive hospitality. It also says in the Gospel of Luke, while they were there, the time came for her to be delivered. Now that's a non-specific amount of time. How long were they there before the baby was born? 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months? It could have been 3 or 4 or 5 months. We really don't know. So the picture of them being in a familial setting, surrounded by people who they might know and might help with the delivery, is actually supported both by Luke and by Matthew.
So there are 4 historical and archaeological facts that mark the place where Jesus was born. First, archaeology has shown that the Church of the Nativity was built on the area of the Bethlehem of Jesus' day. Second, the church sits on the top of a hill where typically patriarchal homes were built. Third, there is a cave underneath the Church of the Nativity, which usually would have been used as a storeroom or a place to keep the animals. And fourth, tradition points to a cave in Bethlehem as being the very place where Jesus was born.
The tradition of a site like a birth site like Bethlehem is actually strengthened by the fact that the earliest record that we have of the tradition of Jesus' birthplace goes back to Justin Martyr, who 15 to 20 years after Bethlehem was totally destroyed by Roman armies, said that the pilgrims came to visit a cave, a cavea. If we go there today, it's at the top of a hill, which is just where a patriarchal home would be built, on top of a hill. And patriarchal homes are kept for many generations and kept within the family. So the tradition of Jesus' birthplace there in the middle of the 2nd century is actually extremely close to the time when those homes were still in existence in Bethlehem. So knowing that Jesus was born there, that his family's patriarchal home would have persisted there until their destruction around 137 AD, and then just 15 or 20 years later, Justin Martyr saying that that's where people commemorated his birth, actually brings it into the category of probably being the place where Jesus was born.
We find also that when you go back to the history books and look at Paulinius of Nola, he notes that Hadrian, who was the Roman emperor from around 117 to 138 AD, built a sacred grove to Adonis over the site of Jesus' birth to efface Christianity. And this was the very purpose of Roman religion, to supersede previous religions. So indeed, they recognized already that something very dramatic in the case of Christianity that occurred at that spot. And then we have, at the beginning of the 4th century, Helena, the mother of Constantine, coming to identify the spot that tradition says Jesus was born. And she identifies that place today as the Church of the Nativity, built on the foundations that she laid. Then in 385 AD, St. Jerome comes to that spot to be there to translate the Vulgate. And yet he says already in the time of his arrival, it's the most venerable spot on earth. So these things together point to the fact that from earliest antiquity, Bethlehem was the one place noted in the Christian world as the birthplace of Jesus.
So next, we're going to travel to the city of Bethlehem to investigate that question. We talked with Jewish archaeologist Dr. Gabriel Barkai, who was awarded the Distinguished Prize for Archaeology in Israel. We asked him what archaeologists have discovered about the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem and the site upon which it sits.
Following the 6 Days War, some archaeologists had studied the site of the Church of Nativity and found out that it is right on top of the ancient mound or ancient hill of early Bethlehem. Bethlehem of First Temple period, of the Davidic dynasty's time, and Bethlehem of the time of Jesus was built right on the site where today the complex of the Church of Nativity is built. Excavations by the Italian scholar, the late Father Bellarmino Bagatti, revealed under the complex of the church a series of caves. Most of the caves were dwellings of antiquity. So it is very much plausible that we deal, in the case of the Church of Nativity, with a real site which existed in the time of Jesus.
Now, if you enter into the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, the guide will take you down some stairs and show you a cave. Archaeologists have discovered that at the time of Jesus, people in Bethlehem built their houses to make provision for the occasional guest. Most homes were multi-level. They had a lower room or cellar that was usually used as a storeroom. In areas like Bethlehem, where there were caves, a cave beneath the house or in back of the house would be used as a storeroom for food or supplies. It could also be a place where the family animals would be fed and sheltered at night. They would be protected from the cold, thieves, and predators. When Joseph and his pregnant wife Mary made the journey to Bethlehem, they were returning to his ancestral home, the place from which his family originated and where undoubtedly some relatives still lived. In Jewish society in Jesus' day, the family was made up of an extended group of people with a patriarch at the head. Married children and their children usually lived with or near the father and mother. Relatives from other towns were welcomed by the patriarch and brought under his protection during their stay in his village. Dr. Hillel Giva is an archaeologist who has worked on some of the most important archaeological excavations in Jerusalem since 1967 and is editor of the leading Hebrew journal on biblical archaeology. Here is an example of a rich man's house that was excavated in Jerusalem that had 2 or 3 guest rooms.
Well, we are in a house from the 1st century AD, one of the largest buildings that were uncovered in the Jewish quarter. This is a model of the house we are in. Courtyard is where we are standing now. This is the courtyard, all paved, square, surrounded by many, many rooms. The living rooms are here, 2 or 3 stories high, mosaic floors, wall painting, stone tables, very wealthy construction of those days. Here down below, a courtyard surrounded by the service wings, where the servants used to live, washrooms, all kind, mikvahs, ritual baths, and all kinds of storerooms. Also, we're down here in this wing.
Now notice, in a wealthier home like this, a 3rd room or even a 4th room would be added for guests and for entertaining. The word for guest room is the Greek word kataluma. It is also sometimes translated inn. Luke used this word in the Christmas story in chapter 2 when he wrote, "And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the kataluma," the guest room, the inn. Here Luke is probably referring to the 3rd room, the guest room in the family home in Bethlehem. Kataluma is the same word used by Luke in chapter 22 to refer to the upper room where Jesus had the Last Supper. It too was a guest room in a home. Luke uses a different word in the parable of the Good Samaritan to describe the inn where the Good Samaritan took the man who was robbed. These facts may shed new light on the circumstances surrounding Jesus' birth.